I was dusting every corner of the house, keeping it spotless the way my controlling husband insisted. When I reached to wipe the windowsill behind his prized ficus plant, I slipped. The pot crashed against the hardwood, soil spilling everywhere. But buried inside the roots wasn't just dirt. It was something hidden, something that made my blood run cold. Imagine building your entire life with someone, every brick, every memory, for over 2 decades. Then, in one shocking moment, it all shatters, literally, and you discover that the man you loved was a stranger, hiding secrets darker than you could ever conceive, buried right beneath your feet. I was just dusting, a mundane Thursday afternoon chore, when my elbow clipped my husband Rick's prized ficus plant. Time seemed to slow as the pot crashed to our hardwood floor, ceramic shards scattering like broken promises. But as I stared at the mess, something glinted in the spilled soil, catching the sunlight. My breath hitched. There, nestled in the dark earth, like a long-buried secret, lay a small brass key, a tiny micro SD card wrapped carefully in plastic, and a folded piece of paper. My father's distinctive handwriting stared up at me. I dropped to my knees, my cleaning supplies forgotten, as 23 years of marriage evaporated, leaving me utterly alone with a stranger. My name is Eileen. And for 23 years, I thought I knew Rick, my husband. I believed in our life, our quiet suburban home, the man who kissed me goodbye every morning and called me sweetheart in front of everyone. The cracks in our marriage? I convinced myself they were normal. Every couple goes through rough patches, right? I believed love meant enduring the small cruelties, the slow, agonizing erosion of my self-worth that had become my daily reality. I was 47, and for the last decade, I'd been walking on eggshells in my own home. It started so subtly I barely noticed. Rick was always particular. His coffee mug, his newspapers, his precious ficus, everything had its place, its specific way. But slowly, his preferences morphed into rules. His suggestions became commands. And my opinions? They just became inconveniences. Eileen, you're being too sensitive. That was his favorite line, always delivered with that condescendingly patient smile. It made me feel like a hysterical child. You're imagining things. You know how you get when you're stressed. The irony? How I got when I was stressed was usually spot on about what was actually happening. The gaslighting was masterful, so subtle, so expertly woven, that I truly began to doubt my own perceptions. If I said he seemed distant, he'd rattle off all the ways he showed love the flowers, always after he'd been particularly cruel. The fancy dinners where he'd spend the whole night glued to his phone, the weekend trips where he'd just disappear for hours, claiming he needed space to think. Our daughter, Angel, now 23 and fresh out of college, started noticing. During her visits home, she'd watch Rick dismiss my comments, correct my stories in front of guests, make decisions about our entire social life without so much as a glance my way. "Mom," she said just last month, her voice careful, concerned, "you know you don't have to agree with everything he says, right? You're allowed to have your own opinions." The fact that my own daughter had to remind me of this basic truth? That should have been my wake-up call. But I just made excuses, like always. Your father's just particular, honey. Marriage is about compromise. Angel's eyes, though, were full of something that looked like pity, and that look haunted me for weeks. Rick's family didn't help. His mother, Cecilia, was a steel magnolia with a tongue like a razor. Always a comment about my housekeeping, my cooking, my parenting, my career. "Rick works so hard," she'd sigh, whenever I mentioned feeling overwhelmed. The least you could do is keep a proper home for him. His brother, Desmond, was even worse. A bully who hid his cruelty behind jokes and just kidding disclaimers. He'd make cutting remarks about my appearance, my intelligence, my worth, always with that same smirk Rick wore. Those two brothers fed off each other, turning family gatherings into a twisted competition to see who could diminish me more effectively. My only ally in that family? Tamara, Desmond's wife. She married into that dysfunction 5 years ago and saw it for what it was. Across the dinner table, when the men were particularly awful, she'd catch my eye, offering silent solidarity, or we'd escape to the kitchen, where we could actually breathe for a few minutes. "They're not normal, Eileen," she whispered to me last Christmas, while we washed dishes and listened to Desmond berate their teenage son. "The way they treat women, the way they talk to us, it's not okay." But Tamara was trapped too, with young kids and a husband who controlled every single aspect of their finances. We were both drowning, just in different pools of the same toxic water. That morning, it started like any other. Rick left for his insurance firm job, his usual perfunctory kiss, his usual list of chores. House, groceries, and his study needed to be dusted, carefully, because everything had to be put back in its exact, designated spot. I'd been working part-time as a freelance graphic designer since Angel left for college, trying to claw back the career I'd abandoned when she was born. Rick tolerated it, as long as it didn't interfere with my primary responsibilities, and as long as I didn't make too much money. If a project really took off, he'd suddenly need more attention, more care, more of my time devoted to his comfort. So there I was, in the living room, dusting around his precious ficus. He'd had it since before we met, claimed it was irreplaceable, absolutely forbade me from moving or repotting it. That's when my phone rang. It was Angel, calling from Portland, living the kind of independent life I'd forgotten was even possible. "Hey, Mom," her voice bright, but a little concerned. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about you maybe talking to someone. A therapist." I'd mentioned, in a moment of weakness, feeling lost, like I didn't recognize myself anymore. Angel immediately suggested counseling. The idea terrified me. What if a therapist confirmed my deepest fear? That I'd wasted decades of my life? That I'd become a shadow? "I don't know, honey," I said, stretching the phone cord, reaching for the windowsill behind the ficus. "Your father thinks therapy is just an excuse for people who can't handle their problems." "Mom," Angel's voice was sharp. "Who cares what Dad thinks about therapy? This is about you. About what you need." The sheer, radical idea that my needs might matter, that they might even take precedence over Rick's opinions, was so foreign, I actually laughed. But it was a bitter, hollow sound. As I turned to respond to Angel, my elbow clipped the ficus pot. Time stopped. I watched in slow motion as 23 years of careful obedience shattered against the hardwood. The ficus lay on its side, roots exposed, looking as vulnerable and displaced as I felt most days. "Mom? Mom, what was that noise?" Angel's voice seemed to come from a long tunnel. I was just staring at the mess, my mind already calculating how much trouble I was in, when I saw them. The objects that would change everything. Nestled in the soil, like secrets finally coming to light. "I have to call you back," I whispered, hanging up before Angel could respond. My hands shook as I picked up the brass key first. Small, the kind for a safety deposit box. Attached was a tag with numbers I didn't recognize, and a bank logo from across town, a bank where we definitely didn't have accounts. The micro SD card was wrapped carefully in plastic, protected from moisture and soil. Someone had gone to great lengths to preserve whatever was on it. But it was the piece of paper that turned my blood to ice. A photocopy of a letter, written in my father's distinctive, careful handwriting. The same script he'd used on birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and the very last letter he'd ever sent me before he died 3 years ago. The letter was addressed to Rick, dated just 2 months before my father's death. It began, "Rick, I'm writing to confirm our discussion about Eileen's inheritance and the foundation we discussed establishing in my name." I read it 3 times before the words truly penetrated. My father, who had died of cancer after a long, brutal battle, who had spent his final months worrying about leaving me financially secure, he'd apparently made arrangements with Rick. Arrangements I knew nothing about. According to the letter, my father had left a substantial sum of money I'd never known existed, specifically for a charitable foundation in his memory. It was supposed to support cancer research and patient advocacy, causes so close to his heart after his diagnosis. Rick was to be the executive, but the foundation was to be established in my name, as my father's only child. I had never heard a word about any of this. The letter went on, detailing account numbers, legal documents, timelines for establishing the foundation. It mentioned meetings with lawyers, tax implications, and Rick's assurance that he would handle everything so I wouldn't be burdened during my grief. My father died believing his legacy would live on, doing meaningful work. And I'd spent 3 years believing he'd left me nothing but memories and a few pieces of jewelry. Where was the money? Where was the foundation? The legal documents? And why had Rick hidden this letter in a ficus pot like some kind of buried treasure? I sat there on the floor, surrounded by soil and ceramic shards, clutching my father's letter. Something cracked open inside my chest. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was rage. Pure, clean rage that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Rick had stolen my father's final gift to me. He'd stolen my father's legacy, his hope for making a difference, his trust in the man he thought was taking care of his daughter. But this, I knew, was just the beginning. With newfound, unsettling calm, fueled by a cold fury, I extracted the micro SD card. My hands, which had trembled moments ago, were now steady. I plugged it into my laptop. The card was a treasure trove of nightmares, dozens of files, photos, documents, audio recordings, and a detailed log of dates and times. The first folder I opened stopped my heart all over again. Surveillance photos. Of me. Leaving the house, entering the grocery store, meeting Tamara for coffee, working in my home office. Taken from a distance, with a telephoto lens, by someone who had been watching me for months, maybe years. The timestamps showed these photos were taken on days Rick claimed to be at work, during hours he was supposedly in meetings. My husband had been stalking me. But as I scrolled, I realized I wasn't his only subject. There were photos of Angel, my daughter, taken near her apartment in Portland, her workplace, the coffee shop where she met friends. Rick couldn't possibly have taken these himself. He was paying someone else to watch our daughter. The confusion warred with a growing horror. Then, the audio files. These were even worse. Recordings of phone conversations. My conversations. With Angel. With Tamara. With my few remaining friends. Conversations I'd had in my own home, in what I believed was privacy. Rick had been recording me, listening to my private thoughts, my fears, my doubts about our marriage. In one, I heard myself talking to Angel about feeling trapped, about wondering if I'd made a mistake staying married for so long. In another, I was talking to Tamara about Rick's controlling behavior, about how he made me feel small and stupid. He had been collecting evidence of my disloyalty, building a case against me like I was a criminal in my own life. And then, the documents folder. My stomach dropped. Divorce papers. Already filled out. Terms that would leave me with almost nothing. A custody agreement that would give Rick primary custody of Angel, my 23-year-old, independent daughter. Restraining order applications, claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. But the most chilling discovery? A psychiatric evaluation report with my name on it. It claimed I suffered from paranoid delusions, depression, and emotional instability. The report was signed by a doctor I'd never met, dated just 2 weeks ago. Rick had been building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent. He was planning to take everything. My father's money, my daughter, my freedom, my sanity. He planned to leave me with nothing but a diagnosis of mental illness and a reputation as an unstable woman no one could trust. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the irrefutable evidence of my husband's monstrous betrayal. The afternoon light shifted, illuminating the broken pot and spilled soil, and I felt like I was seeing my life clearly for the first time in decades. Every fight, every time he'd made me feel crazy or oversensitive, every moment I doubted my own perceptions, it had all been calculated. He had been systematically destroying my reality, my confidence, my connections to other people, all to prepare for the day he would take everything and leave me powerless. The cruelest part? He'd used my father's trust to do it. My father, who loved me unconditionally, worried about my future, tried to provide for me even after his death. Rick betrayed him too. I remembered Dad's final weeks, how relieved he seemed, how he'd told me not to worry about money, that Rick would take care of everything. I'd assumed he meant emotionally. I never imagined Dad had left me a substantial inheritance, or that Rick had been planning to steal it from the moment Dad died. The rage that had been a dull throb in my chest crystallized into something sharp, hard, and focused. This wasn't just about money, or even the surveillance. This was about my father's memory, the good he wanted to do, the sacred trust he placed in a man utterly unworthy of it. Rick thought he was so clever, so careful. He thought I was too broken, too dependent, too afraid to fight back. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I spent the rest of that afternoon meticulously documenting everything. Photos of every document, copies of every file, detailed notes of dates and timelines. I even looked up the bank where the safety deposit box was. Real. Opened 3 years ago, right after my father's death. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. My cousin, Georgina Kyler. She specialized in family law, and Rick had always discouraged me from talking to her, claiming she was too aggressive, always stirring up trouble. Now, I understood exactly why he'd kept me away from someone who could see his manipulation for what it was. Eileen. Georgina's voice was surprised, then warm. It's been so long. How are you? I need help, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I think my husband has been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, so he can steal my inheritance. A pause. Then Georgina's voice shifted, sharp and professional. Where are you right now? Are you safe? I'm home. He's at work. Georgina, I found evidence. A lot of evidence. Photos, recordings, forged documents, legal papers. He's been planning this for years. Don't touch anything else. Don't clean up whatever mess led you to find this, she commanded. I'm coming over right now, and I'm bringing a colleague who specializes in financial fraud. We're going to document everything properly, and then we're going to destroy him. The fierce, protective tone in Georgina's voice. It hit me then, how long it had been since anyone was unequivocally on my side. I started crying. Not the careful, quiet tears I'd learned to shed so as not to upset Rick. These were huge, ugly sobs of relief, of rage, of grief for all the years I'd lost. Eileen, Georgina said gently, you're going to be okay. We're going to make sure of that. But I need you to do something for me right now. What? I need you to call Angel. Tell her to be very careful. If your husband has been having her watched, if he's planning to claim custody over an adult woman, then he's more dangerous than we initially thought. She needs to know. The thought of Angel being in danger because of Rick's twisted plans sent a fresh, burning wave of fury through me. My daughter. My brilliant, independent, strong daughter. Being stalked and threatened by the man who was supposed to love and protect her. I called Angel immediately. Mom, you sound upset. What happened with the thing that broke? Angel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your father has been having you watched. He has photos of you, taken near your apartment, your work. I found evidence he's been planning to file for some kind of custody claim over you, even though you're an adult. I need you to be very careful about your surroundings. And I need you to come home. The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Angel. Mom. Her voice was quiet, so controlled. Are you telling me Dad has been stalking me? Yes. And me. And he's been recording our phone conversations. There's so much more. He stole money that Grandpa left for us, money for a cancer research foundation. He's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. I'm getting in my car right now, Angel interrupted, her voice gaining strength. I'll be there in 5 hours. Mom, do not confront him. Do not let him know you found anything. Can you clean up whatever mess you made and pretend everything is normal until I get there? The fact that my 23-year-old daughter was giving me safety instructions about my own husband should have been humiliating. Instead, it felt like a lifeline. Georgina is coming over to help document everything. She's bringing another lawyer. Good mom. Angel's voice cracked slightly. I'm so sorry. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined. I should have pushed harder. Should have made you leave him years ago. This isn't your fault, baby. It's not yours either, Mom. Remember that. Within an hour, Georgina arrived, bringing Dr. Vance, a tall woman with silver hair, a forensic accountant specializing in financial abuse. They took one look at the broken pot, the scattered evidence, my tear-streaked face, and immediately took charge. First things first, Georgina said, pulling on latex gloves. We document everything exactly as you found it. Vance will photograph the scene, then we'll carefully catalog every piece of evidence. Dr. Vance was already setting up professional camera equipment. Eileen, walk me through exactly what happened. How did you find these items? What was your first reaction? We need a clear timeline. As I told them, they worked with methodical precision. Every document was photographed in place, then carefully bagged. Every file on the micro SD card was copied and verified. The safety deposit box key was examined, traced. This is extensive, Dr. Vance said grimly, reviewing the financial documents. Your husband has been planning this for at least 3 years, possibly longer. The level of documentation, the forged psychiatric evaluation, the surveillance, this isn't impulsive behavior. This is a long-term campaign designed to isolate you and steal your assets. Georgina examined the divorce papers Rick had prepared. These terms are unconscionable. He's claiming you're mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. He's asking for full control of all marital assets, even assets that predate the marriage. She looked at me sharply. Eileen, did you ever sign anything giving him power of attorney? No. I don't think so. He always handled the paperwork for everything. Said it was easier if he just took care of the business side of our marriage. Georgina and Dr. Vance exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. We need to check, Georgina said. If he's forged your signature on legal documents, that's a felony. But first, we need to secure your father's inheritance. Dr. Vance was already on her laptop, fingers flying. The safety deposit box was opened 3 years ago, 2 weeks after your father's death. According to bank records, it's been accessed regularly, about once a month. The most recent access was last week. What's in it? I asked. We won't know until we open it, Dr. Vance replied, but based on these documents, I suspect we'll find the original will, the foundation paperwork, and possibly evidence of where the money has gone. Georgina stood up, brushing soil off her knees. Eileen, we're going to that bank right now. You're going to use that key, and we're going to see exactly what your husband has been hiding. But what if he finds out? I asked, panic rising. What if he comes home and sees the broken pot? We're going to clean this up and make it look like an accident, Dr. Vance said. You're going to tell him you broke his plant, that you're very sorry, and you've ordered a replacement. You're going to act like the submissive wife he expects you to be, just for a little while longer. The idea of pretending, of going back to the performance of being Rick's compliant wife, made me feel sick. But I understood the strategy. We needed time. Time to build our case, to secure the evidence, to make sure he couldn't destroy anything or disappear with the money. How long? I asked. A few days, maybe a week, Georgina said. Just long enough to get everything in order. And then, we're going to destroy him so completely he'll never be able to hurt you, or anyone else again. The safety deposit box. It was a goldmine of incriminating evidence, painting an even more damning picture of Rick's betrayal. My father's original will was there, along with a letter of instruction that made his intentions crystal clear. He'd left me $800,000, money from the sale of his house, his life insurance, investments, specifically designated for the Maximiliano Kyler Foundation for Cancer Research and Patient Advocacy, with me as the primary administrator and beneficiary. There were legal documents Rick had never filed, documents that would have established the foundation and given me control. Instead, he'd transferred the money into accounts under his sole control, using forged power of attorney documents that bore my signature, a signature I had definitely never written. But the most shocking discovery? A folder labeled insurance policies. Inside, life insurance policies on both me and Angel that Rick had taken out without our knowledge. The policies were substantial, purchased just 6 months ago. He's been planning to destroy us, I whispered, staring at the documents, my blood turning cold. Not necessarily, Dr. Vance said carefully. But he's certainly been planning for the possibility of your deaths. Combined with the psychiatric evaluation and the custody papers, this suggests he was preparing multiple scenarios. If he couldn't have you declared incompetent, if you fought back or tried to leave, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air. Georgina was photographing everything with grim efficiency. Eileen, this is enough evidence to put him away for a very long time. Fraud, forgery, identity theft, financial abuse, and, depending on what we find when we dig deeper, possibly conspiracy and attempted murder. But I don't want him to go to prison, I said, surprising even myself. I mean, I do, but that's not enough. Prison would be too easy. He'd become the victim. The poor man whose crazy wife destroyed his life. His family would rally, make excuses, blame me for everything. Georgina looked at me, something like pride in her eyes. What do you want, Eileen? I thought about my father, about the good he'd wanted to do. I thought about Angel, the fear in her voice when she realized she'd been stalked. I thought about Tamara, trapped in her own toxic marriage, and all the other women who might fall victim to Rick's manipulation. I want him exposed, I said, my voice hardening. I want everyone to know exactly who he is and what he's done. His family, his coworkers, his friends. I want the foundation established the way my father intended. And I want Rick to lose everything. His reputation, his job, his family's respect, his sense of control. I want him to feel as powerless and humiliated as he's made me feel for 23 years. That, Georgina said, a fierce smile spreading across her face, we can definitely arrange. Angel arrived that evening, just as Rick pulled into the driveway. I'd spent the afternoon cleaning up the broken pot, ordering a replacement online, and practicing my performance, contrition, anxiety, guilt. When Rick walked through the door, I was ready. Rick, I'm so sorry, I began, before he even set down his briefcase. I was cleaning, and I accidentally knocked over your ficus. I broke the pot, but the plant's okay. I've already ordered a new pot, exactly like the old one. I watched his face, every subtle shift, looking for any sign he suspected. But Rick was so used to my clumsiness, my accidents, my apologies, he barely seemed surprised. Where's the plant now, he asked, with that long-suffering patience he reserved for dealing with an incompetent child. In the kitchen. I repotted it in a temporary container until the new one arrives. He nodded, already dismissing the incident. Try to be more careful, Eileen. That pot was irreplaceable. Oh, if only he knew how truly irreplaceable it was, and how much I'd learned from breaking it. Angel appeared in the doorway, having slipped in through the back. Hi, Dad. I decided to come home for a surprise visit. Rick's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Whatever else he was, he did love Angel. Or at least, he loved his version of her, the successful daughter who reflected well on his parenting. He had no idea she was here to help me destroy him. Angel, what a wonderful surprise. How long can you stay? Just a few days. I wanted to spend some time with Mom, maybe help her with some projects around the house. Over dinner, Angel and I played our roles perfectly. We chatted about her job, her apartment, her friends, while Rick listened with the benevolent attention of a man who believed he was the undisputed center of his family's universe. He was oblivious. That night, after Rick had gone to bed, Angel and I sat in the kitchen, planning our strategy. Georgina thinks we should move fast, I whispered. The longer we wait, the more chance he'll discover what we know. What about Tamara? Angel asked. And his mother and Desmond? Are we going to warn them? I thought about Cecilia's years of subtle cruelty, Desmond's bullying, the way they'd all participated in making me feel small and worthless. Tamara, yes. She deserves to know what kind of family she married into. But the others? They're going to find out the same way everyone else does. Angel nodded grimly. Everyone, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Everyone who ever believed his version of me, everyone who ever thought I was the problem in this marriage, they're all going to learn the truth. The next morning, while Rick was at work, Georgina arrived with a whole team, investigators, more forensic accountants. We had 24 hours to gather every last shred of evidence. And what they found, it was beyond anything I'd imagined. Rick's computer held years of correspondence with private investigators. Not just surveillance of me and Angel, but detailed background checks on my friends, my family, anyone who might offer me support. He had systematically identified and neutralized my entire support network for years. There were emails with his brother, Desmond, discussing strategies for managing me and Tamara. These two brothers had been coordinating, sharing manipulation tactics. Desmond was testing methods on Tamara that Rick then used on me. But the most damning discovery? Communications with the doctor. The same doctor who signed my forged psychiatric evaluation. Rick had been paying him to create false medical records. Not just for me. For other women as well. This wasn't just personal abuse. It was part of a larger, predatory pattern. Eileen, Georgina said, her voice tight with anger. Your husband and his brother are running what amounts to a criminal enterprise. Systematically abusing women, stealing their assets, using forged medical documents to cover their tracks. You're not their first victim. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those years thinking I was the problem, too sensitive, too difficult. I had been the victim of a calculated, criminal conspiracy. How many others? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We're still investigating, Georgina replied, but we found evidence of at least 3 other women over the past 10 years. All of them divorced, declared mentally incompetent, stripped of their assets. All of them now living in poverty while their ex-husbands control their former wealth. I thought about those women. The lives destroyed by Rick and Desmond's greed, their cruelty. How they must have felt, how they must have blamed themselves, wondering what they'd done wrong. We're going to help them, too, I said, my voice firm. When we expose Rick and Desmond, we're going to make sure those women get justice as well. Georgina smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. We spent the next 2 days building an airtight case. Georgina worked with prosecutors, preparing criminal charges. Dr. Vance traced every dollar of my father's stolen inheritance, pinpointing the accounts where Rick had hidden it. The investigators compiled overwhelming evidence of the surveillance, the forged documents, the entire conspiracy with Desmond. Meanwhile, I played my role perfectly. I was the apologetic wife, worried about the broken pot, grateful for Rick's patience with my clumsiness. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his day, gave him no reason to suspect anything had changed. It was as if fate itself smiled. He never even remembered what he was hiding in that ficus pot. I was transforming. Every submissive smile, every deferential gesture, every moment of pretending to be the woman he tried to make me, it all felt like armor now. Protection while I prepared for battle. Angel was magnificent. She chatted with her father about her job, her friends, her future, all while secretly recording conversations, gathering more evidence. Rick, basking in what he thought was his daughter's admiration, revealed more about his plans than he ever would have if he knew she was working against him. Thursday evening, Tamara came for dinner. Rick was always on his best behavior with guests, playing the devoted husband and father. But Tamara knew what to look for now. I watched her silently catalog every subtle put-down, every moment of control, every sign of the abuse she'd been too isolated to recognize in her own marriage. After dinner, while Rick was in his study, Tamara, Angel, and I sat in the living room. I told her everything. Tamara listened in stunned silence as I described the evidence, the conspiracy between Rick and Desmond, the other victims, the stolen inheritance. When I finished, she was crying. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. Desmond has been so controlling lately, so paranoid about money, about my activities. He's been asking strange questions about my family, about any inheritance I might receive when my parents die. And he's been pushing me to sign papers, financial documents he says are just for estate planning. Don't sign anything, Angel said urgently. And Tamara, you need to get out tonight if possible. I can't. The kids will help you, I said. Georgina has resources, safe houses, legal support. You don't have to do this alone. Tamara looked at me, something like awe in her eyes. You're really going to destroy them, aren't you? I'm going to expose them, I corrected. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they are and what they've done. And then, I'm going to use my father's money the way he intended, to help people, to make a difference, to create something good out of all this evil. Friday morning. Georgina called with the news I'd been waiting for. Everything is in place, she said. The prosecutors are ready to file charges. The bank has frozen Rick's accounts. The insurance companies have been notified about the fraudulent policies. And I've prepared a comprehensive dossier for his employer, his professional associations, his social circle. What about the media? I asked, holding my breath. I have a contact at the local news station who specializes in financial fraud cases. She's very interested, especially the angle about the stolen charity money and the multiple victims. I took a deep breath. Then, let's do it. Eileen, Georgina said, her voice serious. Once we start this, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready? I thought about my father, the foundation he'd wanted. The other women Rick and Desmond had victimized. Angel, the life she deserved, free from fear and surveillance. Tamara and her children, the chance to save them from years of abuse. I'm ready. Then we begin in 1 hour. Rick will be arrested at his office. Desmond at his home. The story will break on the evening news. By tomorrow morning, everyone in their social and professional circles will know exactly who they really are. After I hung up, I sat in the living room, right where I'd broken the ficus pot just a week ago. The new pot had arrived, and Rick's plant was already thriving in its temporary home in the kitchen. Soon, I would replant it. But I would never again be afraid of disturbing Rick's precious possessions. Angel found me there, staring out the window at the life I was about to reclaim. "How do you feel, Mom?" "Powerful," I said, and realized it was true. For the first time in 23 years, I felt powerful. The arrests happened simultaneously at 2 p.m. that Friday. Rick was taken into custody at his office, right in front of his colleagues and clients, charged with fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy, and financial abuse. The charges were read aloud in the lobby of his prestigious insurance firm, where he'd spent years cultivating his image as a trustworthy family man. Desmond was arrested at his home, where Tamara had already left with the children and a suitcase full of evidence from his home office. The look on his face when he realized his wife had outsmarted him. According to the arresting officer, it was absolutely priceless. I wasn't there to see either arrest, but Georgina called me with updates all afternoon. By 3 p.m., both men were in custody, their assets frozen, and the investigation into their other victims was officially underway. At 6 p.m., the local news led with the story. Local insurance executive and brother charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting wives and elderly victims. Angel and I watched together, holding hands on the couch where I'd spent so many years walking on eggshells. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Loretta Dominic, had done her homework. She detailed not just the charges, but the pattern of abuse, the stolen charity money, the devastating impact on victims. Maximiliano Kyler, who died of cancer 3 years ago, left $800,000 to establish a foundation in his memory, Dominic reported. Instead, his son-in-law allegedly stole the money and used forged documents to have his wife declared mentally incompetent. Tonight, that wife is speaking out. The camera cut to an interview Georgina had arranged earlier. I barely recognized myself. The woman on screen was confident, articulate, and furious in the best possible way. "My father fought cancer for 2 years," I heard myself say. "He spent his final months planning a legacy that would help other families facing the same battle. My husband stole that legacy, betrayed my father's trust, and spent 3 years gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind. But the only thing I lost was my fear of him." The story included interviews with Dr. Vance about the financial fraud, Georgina about the legal implications, and a prosecutor who promised this was just the beginning of a much larger investigation. But the most powerful moment came when Dominic asked what I planned to do next. "I'm going to establish my father's foundation exactly as he intended," I said, looking directly into the camera. "The Maximiliano Kyler Foundation will support cancer research, patient advocacy, and, thanks to what I've learned through this experience, resources for women escaping financial abuse. My father wanted to help people, and that's exactly what we're going to do." The phone started ringing before the broadcast was even over. The first call was from Cecilia, Rick's mother, screaming about how I'd destroyed her son's life, demanding I fix this mess immediately. I listened to her rage for about 30 seconds before hanging up. For the first time in 23 years, I didn't care what Cecilia Francisco thought about anything. The second call was from Rick himself, calling from jail. "Eileen, you have to listen to me." His voice was desperate, all traces of his usual condescending patience gone. "This is all a misunderstanding. Those documents, the surveillance, I was trying to protect you. You've been so unstable lately, so paranoid. I was gathering evidence to get you help. Even now, caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence, he was still trying to gaslight me." "Rick," I said calmly, "I want you to listen very carefully. I know about the other women. I know about the forged psychiatric evaluations. I know about the life insurance policies you took out on me and Angel. I know about the conspiracy with Desmond. I know everything." Silence on the other end of the line. "The only unstable person in this marriage was you," I continued. "You're a criminal. A predator. A pathetic excuse for a human being. And now everyone knows it. Don't ever contact me again. Don't contact Angel. Don't contact anyone in my family. Your lawyer can communicate with my lawyer. That's the only communication we'll ever have again." I hung up and immediately blocked his number. The third call was from a woman I didn't recognize. "Is this Eileen Francisco?" "The woman from the news." "Yes. My name is Linda Amir. I think my husband did to me what your husband did to you." My heart clenched. "Tell me." Linda's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Married to Desmond's business partner 5 years ago. Slowly, systematically, her husband isolated her, convinced her she was mentally unstable, and eventually had her committed to a psychiatric facility against her will. While she was institutionalized, he divorced her and took control of all their assets, including an inheritance from her grandmother. I've been living in a studio apartment, working minimum wage jobs for 3 years, Linda said, her voice shaking. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. My own family won't talk to me because they believe what he told them about my mental state. But when I saw your story tonight, when I heard about the forged psychiatric evaluations, Linda, I said firmly, you're not crazy. You were victimized by criminals, and we're going to help you get your life back. By the end of the evening, I'd received calls from 6 other women with similar stories. Georgina was right. Rick and Desmond had been running a criminal enterprise, and we'd only scratched the surface. The weekend was a media frenzy beyond anything I could have imagined. The story went viral, picked up by national news outlets, sparking conversations about financial abuse, gaslighting, the vulnerability of women. Hashtag Justice for Eileen started trending, along with hashtag Maximiliano Kyler Foundation and hashtag financial abuse. But more importantly, it brought forward more victims. By Monday morning, Georgina's office had been contacted by 12 women with stories of systematic abuse, financial fraud, forged medical documents. The pattern was always the same: isolation, gaslighting, gradual financial control, then sudden legal action to strip them of everything. Prosecutors expanded their investigation. Federal authorities got involved. This wasn't just about Rick and Desmond's wives. They'd been running a network, including corrupt doctors, complicit lawyers, private investigators who specialized in manufacturing evidence against vulnerable women. Cecilia, Rick's mother, tried to rally support for her sons, giving interviews, claiming I was a vindictive ex-wife who'd manipulated the media. But her efforts backfired spectacularly when a reporter uncovered she'd been receiving regular payments from Rick's fraudulent accounts, payments directly from my father's stolen inheritance. The revelation that Rick's own mother had profited from his crimes destroyed any remaining sympathy. Cecilia went from grieving mother to public co-conspirator. The Francisco name became synonymous with greed and betrayal. Tamara, Desmond's wife, became a hero in her own right. Her decision to gather evidence and leave with her children inspired countless women. She started appearing on talk shows, discussing the warning signs of financial abuse. She and I became incredibly close friends, bonded by our shared experience and our fierce determination to help other women avoid our fate. 3 months later, I stood in a downtown law firm's conference room, surrounded by the other victims of Rick and Desmond's crimes. We were there for the final settlement hearing. Linda Amir was there along with 8 other women whose lives had been shattered. Some had lost their homes, their children, their careers. All of them had lost years to the trauma of systematic abuse. But today, they were getting their lives back. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, clearly appalled by the scope of the crimes, read the settlement terms aloud. Rick and Desmond would serve a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. Their assets, including the money they'd stolen from all of us, would be returned with interest. The corrupt doctors and lawyers were facing their own criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Most importantly, the Maximiliano Kyler Foundation was officially established with an initial endowment of $2.3 million, my father's original $800,000, plus the money stolen from the other victims, plus damages and interest. Mrs. Francisco, the judge said, looking directly at me, your father would be proud of what you've accomplished. This foundation will help cancer patients and abuse survivors for generations to come. I thought about my father, his final letter, trusting Rick to take care of me. He'd been wrong about Rick, yes. But he'd been right about something else. I was stronger than I knew, capable of taking care of myself and others. After the hearing, the victims and I went to lunch. We'd formed an unlikely family, bonded by trauma, but united in our determination to heal and help others. Several women decided to work for the foundation, using their experiences to help abuse survivors navigate the legal and financial challenges of escaping controlling relationships. Angel joined us for lunch, having driven down from Portland. She'd taken a leave from her nonprofit job to help establish the foundation, planning to move back home and work with me full-time. I'm proud of you, Mom, she said as we walked back to our cars. Not just for what you did to Dad, but for who you've become. You're not the same person you were just a few months ago. She was right. The woman who apologized for breaking a ficus pot was gone, replaced by someone I was still getting to know. Someone who spoke up in meetings, who made decisions without asking permission, who took up space in the world without apologizing for it. 6 months after Rick's arrest, I received a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. It was 3 pages of self-pity and manipulation, claiming he'd only been trying to protect me, that he'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to lose everything, that I was vindictive and cruel. It ended with a plea, Eileen, I know you're angry, but we had 23 years together. That has to count for something. I'm asking you to forgive me, to help me appeal my sentence, to remember the good times we shared. I'm still your husband, and I still love you. I read it, waiting to feel something. Anger, sadness, maybe even a trace of the old guilt. But all I felt was a distant pity for a man who still didn't understand that love wasn't about control, marriage wasn't about ownership, and forgiveness wasn't something he could demand or manipulate me into giving. I wrote back a single sentence. I forgive you for my own peace, but I will never forget what you did, and I will never stop fighting to make sure you can't do it to anyone else. Then I filed for divorce. 1 year after breaking that ficus pot, I stood in the lobby of the Maximiliano Kyler Foundation's new offices, watching Angel hang a portrait of my father on the wall. The foundation had already funded 3 research projects, established a support network for abuse survivors, and helped dozens of women escape controlling relationships. Rick's precious, irreplaceable ficus plant sat in a place of honor near the reception desk, thriving in a beautiful new pot I'd chosen myself. It had become a symbol of resilience, of how something could be uprooted, replanted, and grow even stronger than before. Tamara stopped by that afternoon with her children, who were thriving in their new life, free from Desmond's control. She'd started dating a kind man who treated her like an equal, and she was working on a book about financial abuse due out next year. "Do you regret it?" she asked me as we watched the kids play in the foundation's family room. "Destroying your marriage? Starting over at 47? I considered the question seriously. My life was completely different now. Smaller in some ways, but infinitely larger in others. I lived in a modest apartment instead of a big house, but it was mine. I had less money than I'd had as Rick's wife, but I controlled every penny. I was single for the first time in decades, but I was learning to enjoy my own company. I didn't destroy my marriage, I said finally. I exposed it. The marriage I thought I had never existed. It was just an elaborate performance designed to keep me controlled and compliant. What I have now is real. It's mine. And it's so much better than anything I had before." That evening, Angel and I had dinner at my apartment. She decided to stay in town permanently, working for the foundation and building a life entirely her own choice. We'd grown closer than ever, bonded not just as mother and daughter, but as women who had survived something terrible and chosen to use that survival to help others. "Mom," Angel said as we cleaned up, "I have something to tell you." My heart skipped, wondering if she'd met someone if she was moving away. "I've been thinking about changing my name," she said. "I don't want to be Angel Francisco anymore. I want to be Angel Kyler, like you're going to be when the divorce is final." I stopped washing dishes, turning to look at her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Francisco was never really my name anyway. It was just something I inherited from a man who turned out to be a criminal. Kyler is my grandfather's name. My heritage. My choice. And it's the name that's going to be associated with helping people instead of hurting them." I hugged her then, this brilliant young woman who had chosen to stand with me when it mattered most, who had helped me find my strength when I thought it was lost forever. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at a conference on domestic abuse and financial fraud. The audience was filled with lawyers, social workers, law enforcement, survivors. People working to stop the kind of abuse Rick and Desmond had perpetrated. I told them about the ficus pot, about the moment my carefully controlled world shattered, revealing the truth underneath. I talked about believing women when they say something feels wrong, even if they can't articulate it. I discussed warning signs, gaslighting tactics, and how predators use institutions, medical, legal, financial, to legitimize their control. But mostly, I talked about transformation. I spent 23 years believing I was weak, I told the audience. I thought I was too sensitive, too emotional, too dependent to survive on my own. My husband and his family reinforced that belief every day, in 1,000 small ways that made me doubt my own perceptions and abilities. But here's what I learned. The strength was always there. The intelligence, the courage, the capacity for independence. It was all there, just buried under years of systematic conditioning designed to make me forget who I really was. Breaking that ficus pot mistakenly didn't just reveal my husband's crimes. It revealed my own power. And once I remembered that I had power, once I decided to use it, there was nothing he could do to stop me. 5 years after Rick's arrest, the Maximiliano Kyler Foundation had become a nationally recognized organization. We'd helped hundreds of abuse survivors, funded groundbreaking research, and successfully lobbied for legislation that made financial abuse easier to prosecute and harder to hide. Rick and Desmond were still in prison, their appeals denied. Their conspirators were convicted and sentenced. I never remarried, though I dated occasionally. I discovered I enjoyed being single, making decisions without consulting anyone, the peace of a home where I never worried about someone's mood or approval. Angel joked I'd become aggressively independent, and she wasn't wrong. But I'd also learned to trust again, form deep friendships, accept help. The foundation introduced me to an entire community of survivors and advocates, people who understood the journey from victim to survivor to thriver. On the 5th anniversary of breaking the ficus pot, I threw a party. Not for my divorce or Rick's imprisonment, but a celebration of the foundation, the lives we changed, the future we were building. It was in the foundation's main conference room, surrounded by photos of the people we'd helped and the projects we'd funded. Tamara was there with her new husband and blended family. Linda Amir, now working as the foundation's financial counselor. Angel, promoted to executive director. Georgina, not just my lawyer, but one of my closest friends. And in the corner, thriving in its beautiful pot, was the ficus plant. As I looked around the room, at the faces of my chosen family, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not the kind of ending that ties everything up in a neat bow, but the kind of resolution that comes from knowing you've used your pain to create something truly meaningful. Dr. Vance approached me with champagne, a knowing smile. Eileen, I have some news I think you'll appreciate. What's that? Remember the corrupt psychiatrist who wrote your fake evaluation? Dr. Harrison. I nodded. He'd been one of the last conspirators sentenced. His medical license was officially revoked today. He'll never practice again, and he's facing civil lawsuits from every woman whose life he helped destroy. The medical board cited your case specifically as an example of how the system failed to protect vulnerable patients. The news should have felt like a triumph. Instead, it felt like justice. Quiet, inevitable, and long overdue. As the evening wound down, Angel found me by the window, looking out at the city lights. Penny for your thoughts, Mom? I was thinking about your grandfather, I said. How he would have loved this. Not the drama or the pain, but this. The foundation, the work we're doing, the people we're helping. He always believed that good could come from suffering if you were willing to do the work. Angel slipped her arm through mine. He'd be proud of you, Mom. Not just for surviving Dad, but for what you built afterward. You turned his stolen legacy into something even bigger than he originally imagined. She was right. The foundation had grown far beyond my father's original vision. We now operated programs for financial abuse survivors, legal advocacy services, emergency housing, educational initiatives. That taught young people to recognize controlling relationships. Mom, Angel said softly, can I ask you something I've always wondered about? Of course. Do you think Dad ever really loved you? Or was it all just manipulation from the beginning? I'd asked myself that question countless times over the years. In therapy. In quiet moments. In the middle of sleepless nights. I think he loved the idea of me, I said finally. He loved having a wife who made him look good, who didn't challenge him, who made his life easier. But true love, Angel. True love requires seeing someone as they truly are and wanting them to be happy, even if their happiness doesn't serve you. Rick never saw me as a real person with my own needs and dreams. I was just a supporting character in his story. And now? Now I'm the protagonist of my own story. And it's a much better story than the one he was writing for me. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my apartment with a cup of tea and a new photo album. Pictures from the last 5 years, documenting not just the foundation's work, but my own transformation. My first terrified but determined TV interview. Gradual confidence at foundation events. Photos with Angel, with Tamara, with the other survivors who had become my sisters in healing. And on the last page, a picture Angel had taken that morning, me, standing next to the ficus plant. Both of us thriving in our new environment. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago. The one who apologized for existing, who measured her worth by her husband's approval, who believed keeping the peace was more important than keeping her dignity. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone I remembered with compassion, but barely recognized. The transformation hadn't been easy. There were dark nights when I questioned everything, when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake blowing up my life. Moments when Rick's voice in my head was louder than my own, when I almost believed I was crazy, vindictive, impossible to love. But those moments grew fewer and farther between, replaced by a growing sense of my own worth, my power, my capacity for joy. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages that had come in throughout the day. Congratulations from colleagues. Updates from women the foundation had helped. Photos from Tamara's family vacation. A funny meme from Georgina. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I'd started visiting him regularly after the foundation was established, updating him on our progress, sharing victories and challenges. Hi, Dad, I said, settling cross-legged on the grass beside his headstone. I brought you the annual report. I opened the folder, reading him the statistics. The number of women we'd helped escape abuse. Cancer patients we'd helped survive. Money recovered for fraud victims. Research projects funded. Legislation influenced. But the numbers don't tell the whole story, I continued. Yesterday, a woman named Linda. You remember Linda? One of Desmond's victims. She told me she's getting married next month to a man who treats her like an equal, who celebrates her strength instead of diminishing it. She said she never thought she'd trust anyone again, but the foundation helped her learn to trust herself first. I paused, watching a butterfly land on the flowers I'd brought. And Angel, Dad, you would be so proud of Angel. She's become this incredible advocate, this fierce protector of vulnerable people. She's everything I hoped she'd be, but stronger and braver than I ever imagined. She chose to stay and fight alongside me instead of running from the mess. And I think that choice made her into the woman she was always meant to be. The morning was quiet, peaceful in a way my life had rarely been during my marriage. No one monitoring my time, questioning my choices, making me feel guilty for taking a moment to myself. I know you trusted Rick to take care of me, I said softly. And I know you would feel terrible about how wrong you were about him. But Dad, in a weird way, his betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to find my own strength, to discover who I really was underneath all the conditioning and control. I'm not the same person you worried about leaving behind. I'm someone you would be proud to call your daughter. As I stood to leave, I noticed fresh flowers on the grave next to my father's, an elderly woman who had died a few months ago. Placed by someone who loved her, still grieving, still honoring her memory. It struck me, this was what real love looked like. Not the possessive, controlling dynamic I'd mistaken for devotion in my marriage, but this gentle tending, this ongoing care that asked for nothing in return. That afternoon, I had lunch with Georgina to discuss the foundation's expansion. We were considering satellite offices, creating a network of support to reach even more women. Eileen, Georgina said, reviewing budget projections. I have to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Are you happy? Really, truly happy? Not just satisfied with your work or proud of your accomplishments, but actually happy. I considered the question seriously. Happiness had seemed such a foreign concept during my marriage, I'd almost forgotten it was something I was allowed to pursue. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I am happy. Not in the way I thought happiness was supposed to look. I don't have the perfect marriage or the perfect house or the perfect life. But I have something better. I have authenticity. I have purpose. I have relationships based on mutual respect instead of fear and control. I have the freedom to make my own choices, even when they're wrong choices. Georgina smiled. That's the best kind of happiness, Eileen. The kind you create for yourself instead of waiting for someone else to give you. You know what's funny? I said. Rick used to tell me I'd never survive without him, that I was too weak and dependent to make it on my own. He genuinely believed he was doing me a favor by controlling every aspect of my life, that I needed his management to function. And now? Now I realize I was never weak. I was just exhausted from constantly fighting against someone who was supposed to be on my team. Once I stopped wasting energy on that fight, once I started using my strength for myself instead of against myself, there was no limit to what I could accomplish. 6 months later, an unexpected invitation arrived, a request to speak at a conference on domestic violence prevention hosted by the state prison system. The audience would include corrections officers, social workers, and inmates, men participating in a rehabilitation